Today we will be going our second lesson in our Communication Through Art unit. In today's art making activity, we will be drawing our own typography portraits of a person of your choice. But first, let's learn about typography and see some examples. Lesson 2, Typography. We've seen examples of how elements of art are used to communicate a message, emotion, or concept. But did you know that words themselves have been used throughout history as a form of art? So what is typography? Typography is the art of arranging letters and text in a way that makes the copy legible, clear, and visually appealing to the reader. It involves font style, appearance, and structure, which aims to elicit certain emotions and convey specific messages. Another key word that we will see throughout this lesson is calligraphy. Calligraphy is the art of producing decorative handwriting or lettering with a pen or a brush. Calligraphy, from the Greek word kallos, meaning beauty, and graphos, meaning writing, refers to the harmonious proportion of both letters within a word and words on a page. For this lesson, we will look at 3 examples of calligraphy and text used in art. Today, let's begin with Islamic art. Today, calligraphy is considered the most common form of art in the Islamic world. Calligraphy appears on both religious and secular objects in virtually every medium, like architecture, paper, ceramics, carpets, glass, jewelry, wood carving, and metalwork, and usually provides information about the object like its function, maker, or date. Because the divine revelations were given to the Prophet Muhammad in Arabic, Muslims regard the Quran in Arabic script as the physical manifestation of God's message. To use text is then considered as an act of devotion. The first calligraphic script to gain prominence in Qurans and on architecture and portable works of art was Kufic, which features angular letters, horizontal format, and thick extended strokes. Kufic is the oldest form of the Arabic script. It is a style of Arabic script that gained prominence early on as a preferred script for Quran transcription and architectural decoration, and it has since become a reference and an archetype for a number of other Arabic scripts. Eventually, variations of Kufic emerged. Examples range from letters intertwined with floral ornaments to letters that appear to be woven into knots. In contrast to the religious art of the Western world, in which religious figures were depicted through images, Islamic religious art is devoid of any images or icons. The art in this piece is decorated with geometric shapes and has scripture along the border. This architectural space is devoted to prayer. Today, let's look at Japanese calligraphy, or shodo, which is an ancient Japanese practice of artistic handwriting. Shodo is one of the oldest and most profound traditional art forms in Japan. Shodo is a Japanese word which is often translated and described as the way of artistic handwriting or beautiful writing. Another meaning is the art of traditional Japanese calligraphy. Today, shodo is not only a highly regarded art form in Japan, it is both a skill and an aesthetic. The depth of beauty in shodo is the result of diverse techniques being accompanied with a flow of brush and ink, essentially with an inner stillness and spiritual concentration. It is an ancient art separated from any other creative work. It differs in that its main focuses are simplicity, beauty, and a mind-body connection. Today, shodo's true calligraphy is achieved by applying the elements of art line, space, and shape. Today, the real mastery of all these elements of art and skill requires a lot of practice and connection with your inner self. Japanese calligraphy has many purposes. It is an art form, a means of communication, and a Zen practice that evokes harmony and wisdom. This important skill is passed down from generations and emphasizes beauty and balance in the writing. Today, Using a bamboo brush and sumi ink, calligraphers create a sweeping, flowing brushstroke, similar to that of painting. It's a fluid, spontaneous motion that is intended to hold sacred value in each line. Now let's look at a contemporary artist who uses text in her artwork. Today, Jenny Holzer is an American conceptual artist most known for her installation works and her earthworks. Today, Jenny Holzer's work challenges the audience to think critically about the text and images we perceive every day. Today, her aim is to disrupt the passive reception of information by taking phrases that she calls truisms today and placing them in unexpected places, like projecting her truisms onto a building. Today, or presenting them in a visually stimulating manner, like her LED installations. Today, let's begin our art-making activity. Okay, so let's get started with our art-making activity. The way that I'm going to do this demonstration will be almost as if it were live or happening in real time. So this is a follow-along. So I will apologize in advance if there are any noises in the background that might become a little bit distracting. I do have a cat, and so that can get a little bit distracting when he's playful. Or any sounds outside can also become distracting, so I will apologize for that in advance. But regardless, I'm really excited to get started on this art making activity. I feel like the way that we are going to do this is going to be super fun because it's a hands-on. The other one was also hands-on, but I think I'm more excited for this one because I like doing more 2D work. 3D is a little bit of a challenge for me, which the fun in doing 3D work is for it being a challenge, but 2D work, it's like the shodo that we learned in our Japanese calligraphy. There's something relaxing about it, something that's really nice, calming about doing 2D work or working online. So we're gonna go ahead and start with an exercise first, something that you can start off with before you get started on your project. What I would consider a good exercise is try doing your name or your signature and just repeat it all over the page, and just kind of get a good feel for your marker. You will need a Sharpie marker, and throughout the lesson I'm going to show you what objects or what tools you're going to be using, but you're going to go ahead and get started with a quick exercise with writing out your signature a bunch of times all over the page, and you're just going to keep that going. And again, this isn't aimless. You're not just writing your name. You're kind of testing out your marker, seeing what kind of marks you can get with your Sharpie marker or whichever marker it is that you're going to use. And you're kind of gauging how the marker functions, what kind of lines you can make, what kind of marks you can make, how thick you can make it, how thin you can get it. But because we're going to be completing our lines for our final portrait with words, it's better to get a grasp of what your marker can do and how you can control the lines. And so this is a good exercise to get started on it. And I'm going to show you guys, I already completed one. This is one that I completed earlier. So see, now you're getting a whole bunch of lines in there. And one of the things that I feel like it's important to get from when you do these kinds of marks is you start seeing how in clusters, once they start kind of overlapping with each other, you start seeing how much darker it becomes to compare to areas that are empty. So if you have something empty or not overlapping, you start seeing that it looks lighter, whereas areas that overlap plenty of times become darker. So one of the things that you guys are going to have to keep in mind when working on this assignment is 3 elements of arts that you guys should keep in mind is lines, shapes, and actually there's probably not big enough, but let me write it bigger. Lines, shapes, and value. So your lines are the most obvious ones, and you're going to be creating your lines with your letters and the quotes that you pulled for your artist or author. And your shapes are going to help you in our demonstration that we will get into in a little bit when we are drawing a portrait of the artist. And value is going to help you determine how many times am I going to overlap the quotes, how many times am I going to overlap the letters, or am I going to leave empty space. So you have to keep an eye out on the value from your reference picture, so that you can know how you're going to write out your quotes and your letters. So this is a good exercise to get started and get a feel for it. So let's move on to getting our portrait, or our artist or author portrait down. So I'm going to give you guys a easier method. I'm going to start off with a method for you guys to be able to, if you're not confident in your drawing skills or like actually creating a portrait of somebody, I'm going to give you guys kind of an alternative that you can use. I really would recommend that you try drawing the portrait out for a lot of reasons. First being that if you use a reference picture, for example, I'm going to be using, I don't have a picture of my artist, I have a picture of myself in high school. It's embarrassing. I'm not my own favorite artist or author. That'd be a little conceited of me. But I didn't have any other picture, and that's one of the reasons why I would recommend you try drawing the portrait out yourself. Is one, you're limited to having to print something out or print out a portrait. But if you have it, if you're a fan of a celebrity, if you're a fan of Beyonce, Billie Eilish, and you already have pictures of them, then there you go, you have it. But I don't want to do something that you guys, if I can't do it, I wouldn't want to ask you guys to do it. So I have a picture here, and I'm going to show you how you can use a picture to be able to get your portrait. And even that has its own alternatives. So what you're going to do is the most basic thing you can do. It will require a couple of tools. For example, you will need tracing paper. And what you can do with your tracing paper, very simply place it over your reference picture, and you're gonna outline. So remember, this is where you also have to keep in mind your lines, your shapes, and your values. What you want to get out of your reference picture are the lines. You don't want to draw the values, you don't want to draw shapes, you only want the lines. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna try to get a good image of it, and I'm gonna go over and start drawing my face out. But remember, here's where I'm drawing the mouth, right? And one thing about teeth too, I feel like everyone always just like draws out each individual tooth and it makes it look kind of awkward. What I do is I just draw the little ends, honestly, just like the small outline of it, like right here in the middle, and then just a couple of lines here and there. But I don't outline each individual tooth because I find that it's weird whenever we do that. So, and I'm just gonna go around with outlines, with lines. And sorry if my hand gets in the way sometimes, but I'll try to explain as I go. So remember, a good example of what I mean when talking about you don't want to do you want to focus on just lines and not shapes and value. For example, I colored the eyebrow in, which I shouldn't have done, because that in itself is kind of like a shape or a value because it's one of the darkest parts. But by the end of this drawing or this portrait piece, I'm gonna want to use a quote or a kind of, I'm gonna use a line here, like maybe a word or something to kind of make this dark. So I don't want to fill anything in. So I guess that's the way you can put it, is you don't want to fill things in. For example, I'm drawing the eye and I'm not gonna like shade. I know our instinct is to kind of like shade in, but we're not gonna do that. We don't need that, because if you wanted to shade in, you could use your words at the end of the demonstration to create that. I'm not going to color the eye in because, again, I can do that. And another thing, if you're following along, I did forget to mention, when you're drawing, make sure that you are pressing your pencil really hard onto your tracing paper, because we're going to use the graphite from the pencil to transfer the image onto your final paper. So that's one of the other thing about tracing your image is you're gonna have to trace, and there's so many more steps where you could just as well, and I know sometimes we don't feel confident drawing from a reference picture, but honestly, if you just focus on the lines, it should come out fine. And I'm gonna do a demonstration of how I'm gonna draw from an image instead of tracing. That way you guys get an idea of how you could do it as well. But if you really don't feel comfortable, this is your alternative, is to just trace from an image. Another limitation, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, another limitation to tracing from your image is you are limited to this size only. If I wanted to do a bigger piece and, you know, draw on a bigger scale, I wouldn't be able to do it from a reference picture because I'm only limited to the size of the image I'm tracing over. And so that's another reason why I wouldn't prefer that you guys trace over, because then you can't work big. And I think when you work big, it looks a lot lovelier, looks more intentional, and it looks like artwork and not a sketch. So again, I'm just tracing around, and I'm not focusing on value. Value would be like shading this little part of where I see kind of like shading in. I shouldn't care much for that at this right now, because that's not the goal of this project. So I'm just outlining, right? Okay, so again, if you were gonna continue with this, you would want to, you know, fill out the rest if you wanted to get the whole body, or if you just wanted the face, get the necklaces. And so now what I'm going to do, here are your next alternatives. So the next things you could do is, once you have your tracing paper, and this is another thing you could do if you have the resource, but if you do not have the resource, don't even worry about it. But what I have is carbon paper, and this is a great resource or tool, whatever you want to call it, to transfer your image. So you could use the carbon paper. You lay down the carbon face down onto your paper, and you just go back over your lines, right? So if you were going to do this, you didn't need to press your graphite pencil so hard the first time, because you already have the carbon paper to do the work. So when you do that, and you pull over, see that? Then you have the lines, and you transfer onto your working paper. Your working paper being the paper that you will use as your final portrait. So there's that option. The other option that I mentioned was, of course, flipping your image. The other limitation to doing this is your image that ends up getting flipped. So if you wanted it to be the other way, you wouldn't want to use this as your go-to, but it doesn't really do much if you flip the image. But if for some reason it doesn't work for your image to be flipped, then this is one of the reasons you wouldn't want to do it this way. And I just feel like there's so many limitations to doing this reference picture tracing, but you know, if you guys wanted to do it this way, or if you guys needed this even just to start off, or like if you wanted to just kind of get practice and then do it later on, well, this is what it's here for you guys. And I do this because I love you all. So okay, so that's and I'm just now realizing this is also another limitation, is you're probably gonna have to go back over the lines because they don't transfer completely, but that could also be because I wasn't pressing the graphite hard enough. So that's another thing too. The last thing that you could do if you were going to use a printed reference picture is you could go on a piece of paper, it doesn't have to be tracing paper, but you could literally go on a piece of paper. And this is the thing, I do not really recommend this because it is just so tedious, but if you really wanted to do it, then by all means, what you could do is start creating a block, your own carbon paper basically. So you would just color, and just rub off all your a lot of graphite onto your page. And you would have to do this for a really big chunk. So I'm not going to do it for time's sake. I'm not making this video for you guys to just watch me draw a big chunk of graphite on paper. So I'm not going to continue that, but you would basically need something very, very dark and just fill the whole page. And then what you could do is you could put your reference picture over it and then draw your, well, actually you'd flip this over. Then you would flip it over, put your reference picture, and then start drawing your lines. But it wouldn't work with this because it's so thick, or if I did want to work with this, I would just have to really press down. And so again, I feel like that's just so much work for something that I'm pretty sure it will look just as fine if you just drew your portrait from a picture instead of printing out your picture and then drawing with it. Okay, so now that we have a good idea, or we've gone over the alternatives for what you could do, I'm gonna go ahead and get started on drawing just from an image and showing you guys how I would do it. And I know maybe you're thinking, well, Veronica or Miss Signs, you know, you're an artist. You know how to draw. You know how to do these things. True, but, you know, it did come from practice. And also true, maybe I did start drawing from tracing at first, but you will never get better if you don't start somewhere. So I gave you all that reference or that little demo if you wanted to trace from a picture as practice, but make sure that you are challenging yourself. Don't just go as like, oh, well, I'm gonna use that and I already know how to do that and my picture's gonna come out nice. If you feel like, you know what, yeah, I know how to do that, but I want to challenge myself to start actually learning how to draw from a picture, then please challenge yourself to get better, because if you don't start now, you're never going to get better. Practice makes perfect. I may be able to draw now just by looking at a picture, but I started because at first I challenged myself. I took a risk to try and draw, and it didn't come out as perfect as the picture was, but it taught me things. So I encourage you all to definitely try to draw even from a reference picture instead of tracing. But if you absolutely have to trace, that's completely fine. You start somewhere, you grow, and you practice, but always challenge yourself to do better, okay? So now let's start drawing from the image, and I'm gonna draw a picture. My author that I chose is C.S. Lewis. He's one of my most favorite authors. I just love his storytelling. I love the Chronicles of Narnia, and I also read some of his essays and stuff. And so the picture that I'm drawing from, I'm gonna try to upload or kind of give you guys a snippet of a picture somewhere. I did choose C.S. Lewis, but you guys can choose literally anybody that you feel influenced by, or anybody that you have felt motivated by. You can choose a celebrity, your favorite singer, your favorite band, someone from your favorite band, so author like I'm doing, favorite movie actor, why are they, you know, what quotes from them have you heard that make them a great influence, a person from history, anyone who's influential that you feel like, you know what, the stuff that they did was important. You can also, and for any of you guys who like anime, you are more than welcome to use your favorite anime character from any anime and use quotes. You can use song lyrics even if you feel like that makes sense. But remember, the whole purpose is you're connecting the words to your image. So you don't want to use someone, you don't want to like use song lyrics and then connect it to someone that's like not even relevant to the quote. Like that'd be like really weird. Like, you use Abraham Lincoln quotes, but you draw SpongeBob. That doesn't make sense. Unless it makes sense to you, that's fine. You can do that, but let's try to keep the two connected. So I'm gonna start off with, and I always start off with shapes, and this is the next thing that I was asking you guys to keep an eye out. So when I draw a portrait, I tend to look at the shapes first. And so what I'm doing is, I kind of noticed in the image that I showed, he kind of has an oval face. And so I'm going to try to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see absolutely everything that I'm working on. So I'm drawing out an oval. And I'm just keeping in mind the shapes, right? Again, it doesn't have to look picture perfect because that's not the goal of this project, right? So he has an oval head and his ears kind of go down like this. And for this part, and I'm sorry, I forget to mention how hard you should be pressing on your pencil. For this one, you don't want to press it hard. For the other demonstration that I was just doing, you do want to press it because you're going to transfer, but here you're going to erase these lines, so you don't want to press too hard because then it's going to stay stuck. You're only using these lines to help guide you on where your quotes are going to be, so you definitely don't need. Okay, and so I'm just going through and I'm just measuring out where his eyes would be, and so here's his eyebrow. It kind of goes, and this is why shapes are important in this step. I just need to know that his eyebrow kind of has this shape, and hopefully I can get a picture kind of on the corner somewhere so you guys can see it. And so these are just the shapes, and so his nose kind of goes down a very long, and then it just kind of turns here, right? And again, so if you notice, there's this like shadow, and I'm hoping to kind of use maybe words or something to get it there, but we'll see how this turns out, right? So I'm just doing the nose, and I'm looking at the most darker areas that look like they have a line. So I'm looking for the shapes, and I'm looking for the lines in his face. I'm not looking for the shadows that happen under his eyes or the shadows that happen alongside his nose. I'm just looking for lines being in the mouth, or shapes right there on top, or the eyebrows, shapes. His eyes kind of go here, right? And it's just a line. It does kind of have that aged look underneath, and drawing his eyes. So it's something literally as simple as just this, and going in his eye. And see, I could go through and erase and get all of these details all picture perfect and accurate, because right now I can tell you, yeah, I can see how it doesn't look like C.S. Lewis. But again, the point is not to get a picture perfect portrait. The point is to pick an author or a celebrity or someone that you feel inspired by and use letters to create a portrait of them. That's the goal. The goal is not to show how great, how much technical skill you have. The goal is to just create, just make things. So I'm gonna say I am honestly pretty satisfied with what I have so far, right? I think I like this. And so now we're going to use our quotes from C.S. Lewis. And we're going to take our Sharpie marker, right? And so I do have my quotes kind of saved up on a different tab, so I have to get to that really quick. I'm gonna start using quotes from C.S. Lewis. And I'm just gonna pull the first ones that I kind of have. So a quote from him is, "We laugh at honor and shocked to find traitors in our midst." So I'm just going to go through, and I noticed that there is a darker shape on this, a darker shade here. So this is where value comes in. Now you're going to take a look at the areas where your portrait had value, had darker value and lighter value, and you're going to avoid writing in the areas that have lighter value, and you are going to write words in the area that has darker value. So if I were to look at the picture, I would say this was the darkest area, but it kind of goes from here to up here, right? And so we're gonna start at the bottom. And I'm just gonna go around where my lines were, and I'm just gonna continue that. See? Okay. And I'm just going to continue doing that. So every quote that you have, you're just going to continue applying it to the lighter areas. And I'm going to speed it up a little bit for you guys so you guys can just kind of see that I'm going to be doing that. And I'm going to concentrate a little bit, so I might get a little bit quiet. So I'm just going to speed through this next part. But just notice in the areas that I'm writing and the area, just keep in mind and take note of the areas that I am choosing to write my words in and the areas that I'm choosing to leave blank. Okay, now I feel like I'm gonna pause a little bit here so that you guys can see I did the entire outline of C.S. Lewis, but I think that the parts that will get a little bit tricky are inside the eyes and nose. So some things that I did do is I did overlap some of the quotes over each other, and that created that, how we talked about in our demonstration at first, that created a kind of, you know, heavier value per se. So some of the quotes are, they are overlapping. So I did allow that. I also did make choices on how I was going to apply them. So there's different font here that I decided I made it smaller here. And then if you notice on this ear, I decided that the line goes down. So I also made the quote, it didn't go straight across. It just, the task, you know, each individual word goes down, and then I made one word, each individual letter went down. And so that's how I'm controlling the quotes, just to give you guys a little bit of insight into the choices that I'm making. That way you guys get an idea of what choices you can make. I think it's going to be harder to do everything inside of the face because there's just such small lines or small spaces that you want to avoid writing up here. So I'm going to show you guys how I decided to kind of control that area. So I'm going to choose one quote. I'm just using one quote for the entire face until I run out of the quote, basically. So it's like using words as paint. So I'm going to take each individual letter or word from the quote, and I'm just going to, and I'm also doing it in all caps to fill in the space. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm changing the shape or the size of the letters to make sure that I can get and you can include commas and stuff as your words. So I'm just going to continue the quote onto the other side. And now it's connected to this side. And I'm continuing the quote, so I'm still using the same quote. And so I'm just using all of that, right? And see how I used one word to fill in the space? It doesn't have to be legible. I guess that's one way to think about it, is that you don't have to be able to read every single quote perfectly. You're just using the letters as almost your lines or your paint to fill in these spaces. So I've ran out of my quote, and I'm just going to continue on with the next quote, and I'm just going to keep filling in those spaces. This next quote is from the Screw Tape Letters, which is a really, the quote that I just wrote is from the Screw Tape Letters. This next one is from Mere Christianity, a book that he wrote just kind of as a defense of Christianity, and it's really cool, a cool read. Let me see. So it'll be just small, and I'm not pushing down because these lines are supposed to be so fine and simple, so I'm not pushing down. I'm just kind of hovering over to get really thin line, and then I just continue the quote. So this is all still the same quote, and I noticed that there was a shadow down here, so I'm probably going to make the letters bigger here. And then I'm going to continue the quote. And there you are. So you can continue adding and continue the quotes, and you can do more. And actually, I'm going to continue just a little bit more. And I'm just completing some areas, and I'm even looking at the areas that had slight shadows, and I feel like maybe the side of the nose could use full. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with what I have, and I'm just going to show you guys from a distance what it looks like. Now you can keep this going. Something that I probably would change is it kind of looks like he doesn't have hair, even though, you know, he does. So I probably would still add maybe a couple of quotes here, and just depending on the direction of the hair, I would, you know, make the quote go. You know, you can even get the letters to kind of shift up and do more things with it. You can even change the colors of each quote if you want to do that. That's another option. But yeah, that's it. That's the demonstration. I'd be really excited to see what you guys come up with, and if you do end up doing this demonstration, or if you do end up doing something similar, please, please, please let me know. I would love to see what you guys have. And that is the end of our lesson. Next week, we're actually going to be learning a little bit more about architecture and how that is used for communication. So I'll see you next time.